Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The opulent, sun-drenched living room of the Quartermaine mansion, a space usually resonating with the quiet hum of old money and repressed hostility, was about to become a battleground. The air, thick with the scent of polished mahogany and expensive floral arrangements, was charged with a new, volatile energy. Tracy Quartermaine, the matriarch whose sharp tongue was as much a family heirloom as the artwork on the walls, stood with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the woman she had, for a fleeting, beautiful moment, believed to be her long-lost daughter. Michael Corinthos, young, earnest, and bearing the weight of his family's legacy like a well-tailored suit, stood beside her, his posture rigid with a similar, gut-wrenching betrayal. Before them stood Ronnie, a figure who had woven herself into the very fabric of their fractured family with the skill of a master tailor. Her face, which had so recently been a canvas of warmth and familial affection, was now a carefully controlled mask. But the cracks were showing. The discovery had been incremental, a series of small, unsettling clues that coalesced into an undeniable, horrifying truth, culminating in a piece of damning evidence Michael now held in his trembling hand, a forged birth certificate, discovered tucked away in a locked drawer of a room that was never truly hers. "I think you have some explaining to do," Tracy's voice cut through the silence, each word sharp and precise, like shards of ice. It was not the hysterical screech one might expect, but a low, dangerous tremor that was far more terrifying. This was the voice she used before eviscerating a business rival, not the woman who had tearfully embraced a returned child. Ronnie's eyes, which had once sparkled with what seemed like genuine tears of reunion, darted between them. She attempted a smile, a weak, pathetic imitation of the radiant one she'd used to disarm them. "Tracy. Michael. I can explain. It's not what you think." "Don't," Michael interjected, his voice firm, though a slight quiver betrayed his youth and the depth of his hurt. He took a step forward, the document in his hand feeling like a lead weight. "Don't insult our intelligence any further. We know. We know you're not who you said you were. You're not my cousin. You're not her daughter." The facade crumbled. The pleasant, accommodating posture Ronnie had maintained for weeks stiffened. The warmth in her eyes evaporated, replaced by a flinty, calculating coldness. The transformation was jarring. It was as if the sweet, loving daughter had been a costume, and the zipper was finally being pulled down to reveal the stranger within. "Who are you?" Tracy demanded, her voice rising now, the control beginning to slip as the raw, maternal wound was ripped open anew. "Who the hell are you, and what did you do with my money?" The mention of money was a classic Tracy Quartermaine touch, a deflection from the profounder, more painful emotional theft. But it was also a valid question. The Quartermaine fortune was a beacon for grifters and con artists, and they had built up defenses against such attacks. But this had been different. This had been an attack on the heart, a targeted strike against their most vulnerable spot, family. Ronnie let out a short, harsh laugh, a sound utterly foreign to the ears that had grown accustomed to her gentle tones. "Your money? Is that all you people ever think about? That vast, suffocating Quartermaine fortune? It's always the bottom line, isn't it, Tracy?" "Don't you dare turn this around," Michael shot back, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with his aunt. The familial solidarity, forged in the fire of this shared betrayal, was a formidable sight. "You came into our home. You manipulated your way into our lives. You made my aunt believe, you made me believe, that we had found a piece of our family that was lost. You preyed on our grief. So, I'll ask you again. Who are you?" The woman known as Ronnie seemed to weigh her options. The game was up, the performance was over. The need for the charade had evaporated, leaving only the stark reality of exposure. She straightened her spine, and a new persona seemed to click into place, one of defiance and cynical resignation. "My name is Veronica Miller," she stated, her voice flat and devoid of its previous melodic quality. "And no, I'm not your beloved long-lost relative. She's gone. Has been for years." The admission, so blunt and cold, landed like a physical blow. Tracy staggered back a step, her hand flying to her chest as if she'd been shot. the confirmation of her deepest fear, that her daughter was truly, irrevocably lost, was more devastating than the lie itself. All the hope that had blossomed so fiercely and so recently withered and died in an instant, leaving a void darker than before. Gone? Tracy whispered, the word a broken breath. What do you mean, gone? Michael pressed, his own heart hammering against his ribs. He moved to steady Tracy, his grip on her arm both protective and needy. I mean, she died, Ronnie, Veronica said without a hint of remorse. A long time ago. I knew her. We were in a difficult situation together. She talked about you, Tracy. She talked about this house, this life. She was full of such anger, such bitterness at being cast out. She died with that anger. I saw an opportunity. I figured if the real thing couldn't come home to claim her birthright, maybe someone who knew her story could. The sheer audacity of the confession left them speechless for a moment. This wasn't just a random con, it was a plan built on the grave of their actual relative. It was a violation that went beyond greed, it was a desecration. You're a monster, Tracy breathed, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of horror. You used a dead girl's life, my daughter's memory, as a tool for a con. I'm a survivor, Veronica corrected, her lips twisting into a sneer. And you people, with your gilded cages and your endless drama, you made it easy. You were so desperate to believe, so hungry for a happy ending to soothe your guilty consciences, that you didn't want to see the truth. You handed me the script, and I just played the part. Michael felt a surge of white-hot anger. We offered you love. We offered you a family. And you were just acting? Love? Veronica laughed again, the sound brittle and sharp. What you call love is just another form of control in this house. Tracy's conditional affection, Michael's noble protector routine. It's all a performance. I just learned my lines better than you know yours. The psychological warfare was brutal. She was twisting their genuine emotions into something shallow and manipulative, holding up a distorted mirror that made their own actions seem as false as hers. It was the con artist's final defense, to make the victims question their own reality. Get out, Tracy said, her voice regaining its steel. The initial shock was receding, replaced by a towering, incandescent rage. Get out of my house. Now. Veronica didn't move. She glanced around the lavish room, her gaze lingering on the expensive artifacts, the crystal decanters, the view of the manicured gardens. Just like that? After everything we've shared? The mother-daughter lunches, the family dinners, you're just going to throw me out on the street? The only thing we shared was a fiction that you created, Michael stated, his jaw clenched. And you're lucky that throwing you out on the street is all we're doing. You have 5 minutes. Go upstairs, pack your things, only the things you came with. Nothing that belongs to this family. The word family hung in the air, a bitter, poison thing. A flicker of genuine fear finally crossed Veronica's face. The prospect of being cast out from this world of comfort, of returning to whatever life she had left, was clearly a terrifying one. The bravado faltered. You can't be serious, she pleaded, a last, desperate attempt to salvage the persona of Ronnie. Tracy, please. I have nothing. What was I supposed to do? I was desperate. You have to understand. I understand perfectly, Tracy cut her off, her eyes like chips of granite. I understand that you are a liar and a fraud. I understand that you opened up old wounds and poured salt in them for your own profit. I understand that you made a fool out of me in my own home. There is nothing you can say that I will ever want to hear again. Now, get out of my sight before I call the police and have you arrested for fraud, trespassing, and emotional distress. The threat of police involvement seemed to be the final nail in the coffin. Veronica's shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight drained out of her, leaving behind a hollow, weary woman who looked nothing like the vibrant Ronnie they had known. Without another word, she turned and walked slowly toward the grand staircase. Each step she took seemed to echo in the vast, silent room. Michael and Tracy stood frozen, watching her go, a united front of devastation and resolve. The climb up the stairs seemed to take an eternity, a slow, painful retreat of a defeated army. When she disappeared from view, the tension in the room did not break, it simply changed form. It solidified into a heavy, grieving silence. Tracy's rigid posture collapsed. She sank onto the plush velvet of the sofa, her face buried in her hands. The sobs that racked her body were silent, shuddering things, all the more powerful for their lack of sound. Michael stood guard for a moment longer, staring at the empty staircase as if expecting her to reappear, to reveal that this, too, was just another layer of the cruel joke. When it remained empty, he let out a long, shaky breath and went to sit beside his aunt. He didn't try to hug her. Tracy Quartermain was not a woman who welcomed physical comfort in moments of vulnerability. Instead, he simply sat there, a solid, silent presence in the storm of her grief. "She's really gone," Tracy finally said, her voice muffled by her hands. "My baby is really gone. And that creature, used her. Used me." "I know," Michael said softly, the words inadequate. "I'm so sorry, Tracy. I should have seen it. I should have known." Tracy lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed but dry now, the tears replaced by a familiar, fierce bitterness. Don't you dare blame yourself. She played us both. She was good. Professional." She spat the word out like a curse. "We wanted to believe it so badly that we ignored every instinct, every red flag." They sat in silence again, listening to the faint sounds of movement from upstairs, drawers opening and closing, a suitcase zipper. Each sound was a punctuation mark on the end of the fantasy. "What do we do now?" Michael asked, his mind already shifting from the emotional fallout to the practical consequences. "The police? The press? The rest of the family?" Tracy waved a dismissive hand, though the gesture lacked its usual force. "The police, perhaps. But airing this dirty laundry in public? Letting all of Port Charles know that Tracy Quartermain was duped by a two-bit con artist? I think not. We will handle this, internally." The word internally carried the full weight of the Quartermain name, a promise of quiet, powerful retribution that would never see the light of day. "And the family?" Michael pressed. Ned, Olivia, Brooke Lynn, they had all, to varying degrees, accepted Ronnie. They would need to be told the ugly truth. "We'll tell them she was a fraud," Tracy said, her voice gaining strength as she focused on the logistics of damage control. "We'll give them the bare facts. They don't need to know the details of my humiliation." She looked at Michael, her gaze sharpening. "This stays between us, Michael. The full story. Do you understand? We were clever enough to uncover her scheme before any significant financial or legal damage was done. That is the narrative." Michael nodded slowly. He understood the need for spin, for protecting the family's reputation and, more importantly, Tracy's pride. But he also felt a deep, personal sense of violation that wouldn't be so easily contained by a narrative. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only 10 minutes, Veronica Miller descended the stairs. She was carrying a single, modest suitcase, the one she had arrived with. She had changed out of the expensive clothes the Quartermains had bought for her and into a simple, plain outfit that looked cheap and foreign in the opulent setting. The transformation back to her true self was complete. She didn't look at them as she walked toward the front door. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, on her exit from this gilded world. "Stop," Tracy's voice rang out, halting her just as her hand touched the ornate brass doorknob. Veronica paused, her back still to them. Tracy stood up, walking slowly toward her until she was just a few feet away. "I want you to look at me." Reluctantly, Veronica turned. Her face was a blank slate, all emotion carefully locked away. "I want you to remember this moment," Tracy said, her voice low and deadly serious. "I want you to remember the look on my face. Because if you ever set foot in Port Charles again, if you ever so much as whisper my daughter's name, if you attempt to contact anyone in my family ever again, you will discover what the Quartermain name truly means. It doesn't just mean money. It means power. And I will use every last ounce of that power to destroy you." Do I make myself perfectly clear? There was no bluster in the threat. It was a simple, cold statement of fact. Tracy Quartermain, wounded and enraged, was perhaps at her most dangerous. A flicker of understanding, of genuine fear, passed behind Veronica's eyes. She gave a single, tight nod. "Now get out," Tracy whispered. Veronica Miller turned the knob, pulled open the heavy oak door, and stepped through it. The afternoon sunlight streamed into the foyer for a brief moment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Then, the door swung shut with a soft, final click. She was gone. The sound of the closing door seemed to echo in the vast emptiness of the house. Tracy stood staring at it for a long time, her body rigid. Michael came to stand beside her, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. This time, she didn't shrug it off. The immediate battle was over. The intruder had been expelled. But the war for their peace of mind was just beginning. The house, for all its grandeur, felt suddenly colder, emptier. The ghost of a daughter had been laid to rest, but in her place, the phantom of a meticulously constructed lie had taken root, a poison that would linger in the halls of the Quartermain mansion for a long time to come. The trust had been shattered, and the process of picking up the pieces, of learning to trust their own judgments again, would be a longer and more difficult journey than either of them could yet imagine. The silence after the storm was, in its own way, louder than the confrontation itself, filled with the unspoken questions and the profound, aching loss of what they had so desperately wanted to be true. The afternoon had started out like any other at the Quartermain mansion, filled with the usual chaos, sharp remarks, and endless arguments about who truly belonged under the family roof. Yet beneath all the everyday bickering, there was a sense of unease that no one had yet dared to put into words. Tracy Quartermain, who prided herself on being 2 steps ahead of everyone else, had been watching Ronnie closely for weeks, suspicious of the way she moved around the house as if she owned it, inserting herself into conversations, and weaving stories that didn't quite add up. At first, Tracy had written it off as just another opportunist trying to leech off the Quartermain's wealth and name, something she had dealt with more times than she could count. But the inconsistencies kept piling up, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. Michael Corinthos, though younger and perhaps more forgiving by nature, had also begun to notice cracks in Ronnie's carefully constructed image. He had welcomed her into the house initially, perhaps out of guilt for being too often distracted by his own battles and responsibilities to notice the loneliness of others. She had seemed genuine at first, with a disarming charm and a way of speaking that made it sound as though she had shared in their struggles, suffered losses that echoed their own. Michael, who knew the sting of betrayal too well, had wanted to believe her. He had wanted to think that maybe, just this once, someone had entered their orbit with pure intentions. But it was never that simple in Port Charles, and certainly not within the walls of the Quartermain estate. The breaking point came late one evening, after yet another argument at the dinner table. Tracy had been needling Ronnie with pointed questions, trying to trip her up, while Ronnie countered with vague but confident answers. Michael, watching silently at first, realized that Tracy's instincts were sharper than ever. He saw the subtle flicker in Ronnie's eyes when asked about her past, the hesitation before she answered questions about her so-called family connections. That hesitation betrayed something bigger, something carefully hidden. Michael decided to start digging quietly, and what he uncovered was enough to shatter any remaining illusions. Ronnie wasn't who she claimed to be. In fact, the identity she had been using belonged to someone else entirely, a woman with no ties to Port Charles, no connection to the Quartermains, and no reason to suddenly appear in their lives. The real story was far darker. Ronnie had crafted a facade, slipping into their world with deliberate calculation, hoping to exploit their weaknesses. Michael's discovery left him stunned at first, torn between anger and disbelief. He wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, to think there might be some tragic explanation for her lies, but the evidence was undeniable. When Michael confronted Tracy privately with the information, her reaction was equal parts fury and vindication. She had known something was wrong, and now she had the proof. For Tracy, the betrayal cut deep not only because Ronnie had lied but because she had dared to underestimate the Quartermains, assuming she could manipulate her way into their lives without consequence. Tracy had spent her entire life fighting to protect her family's legacy, and she wasn't about to let an imposter threaten it. Together, she and Michael agreed that Ronnie had to go, and they would not wait another day to make it happen. The confrontation was explosive. Ronnie had barely stepped into the living room when she was met with Tracy's icy glare and Michael's stern silence. At first, she tried to play innocent, flashing that same practiced smile, asking if something was wrong. But the tension in the room was unmistakable, and for once, she didn't have control of the narrative. Tracy's voice, sharp and cutting, laid out the truth in no uncertain terms. She listed every lie Ronnie had told, every inconsistency, every false detail about her supposed background. Ronnie tried to interrupt, to spin another tale, but Tracy's words cut through her protests like a knife. Michael stood at Tracy's side, his expression harder than Ronnie had ever seen. He didn't yell, he didn't need to. His disappointment spoke volumes. "You don't belong here," he said firmly, his tone carrying a weight that silenced even Ronnie. "You came into this house under false pretenses. You lied to all of us. And you thought we wouldn't find out. But now we know exactly who you are." Ronnie's mask began to slip, the charm and confidence giving way to defensiveness, then desperation. She tried to turn the tables, accusing Tracy of being paranoid, accusing Michael of betrayal. But it was useless. The Quartermaines had been manipulated too many times before to fall for the same tricks. Tracy, with her arms crossed and her eyes blazing, finally delivered the ultimatum. Ronnie was to pack her things and leave immediately. The weight of those words filled the room like a storm cloud. Ronnie sputtered, tried one last time to plead her case, but there was no sympathy left. Michael, though quieter than Tracy, made it clear that this wasn't up for debate. He had given her trust, and she had shattered it. Now, there was no going back. The moment Ronnie realized she had truly lost was almost palpable. Her shoulders slumped, her defiance crumbled, and for the first time since arriving, she looked powerless. Yet even in defeat, there was something unsettling about the way she glared at them, as though silently promising that this wasn't over. She gathered her belongings with a forced calmness, every movement dripping with resentment. Tracy watched her like a hawk, unwilling to let her out of sight until she was gone. Michael remained close by too, though part of him wrestled with the guilt of what they had to do. But in the end, there was no choice. The Quartermaines had been deceived enough, and Ronnie's presence had been built on nothing but lies. When the front door finally closed behind her, Tracy let out a sharp exhale, muttering about how she had seen it coming all along. Michael, meanwhile, stood quietly for a long moment, staring at the closed door, wondering what Ronnie's true motives had been and whether her departure would really be the end of it. The silence that followed Ronnie's departure felt heavier than the heated argument that had filled the room just moments earlier. The Quartermaine mansion, usually alive with the sounds of chatter, footsteps, and constant bickering, was now eerily still. Tracy lowered herself into a chair, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, trying to mask the mix of triumph and unease that pulsed through her. For Tracy, exposing Ronnie had been necessary, a matter of principle and survival. She had always been fiercely protective of her family's home, their fortune, and their legacy, even if it meant being ruthless. Yet even as she sat there savoring her small victory, a nagging thought tugged at her. Why had Ronnie gone to such lengths? What did she want from them that was worth building an entire life on a lie? Michael stood near the fireplace, his expression still clouded by disbelief. He wasn't like Tracy, he didn't revel in confrontation or find satisfaction in humiliating an enemy. Instead, he felt a pit in his stomach that wouldn't go away. He thought back to all the moments he had let Ronnie in, the times he had listened to her talk about pain and struggle, stories that now seemed hollow and fabricated. A part of him hated himself for believing her so easily, for ignoring the warnings that had been there from the start. He turned toward Tracy, his voice quiet but firm, asking her if she truly believed Ronnie was gone for good. Tracy's laugh, short and humorless, was her only answer. She knew better than to think someone like Ronnie would just vanish. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp, but for Ronnie, it carried a bitterness that went deeper than the chill. She had walked out of the Quartermaine mansion with her head held high, refusing to let them see her broken, but the sting of rejection gnawed at her. They had seen through her, stripped her of the image she had worked so hard to build. Still, as she stood under the streetlights, gripping the bag that held her few belongings, Ronnie's mind was already racing. If Tracy and Michael thought this was the end of her story, they were sorely mistaken. She had come too far, invested too much, to walk away empty-handed. And if she couldn't secure her place in their home through charm and deception, then she would find another way, one that might leave them wishing they had never crossed her. Back inside, the conversation between Tracy and Michael turned from relief to strategy. Tracy insisted that they should take steps to ensure Ronnie couldn't return, suggesting locks be changed, extra security measures installed, and even notifying the rest of the family so no one else would be caught off guard. Michael, though he agreed in principle, hesitated at the severity. He reminded Tracy that Ronnie hadn't actually harmed them yet, that she had simply lied her way in. But Tracy scoffed at his attempt at compassion. In her mind, lies were just the first weapon. If left unchecked, they escalated into schemes, theft, or worse. Tracy knew from decades of experience that people like Ronnie always had a deeper agenda, and she wasn't about to underestimate her again. That night, Michael lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling, unable to silence the thoughts that swirled in his head. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed the moment when Ronnie's face shifted from confidence to desperation, when her carefully built world collapsed under the weight of truth. He thought about the pain in her eyes, not pain for being caught, but something deeper, something rooted in her past that she hadn't shared. He wondered if there had ever been a kernel of truth in her stories, or if it had all been smoke and mirrors. His heart, so often at war with his head, left him uneasy. He wanted to believe people could change, that not everyone who lied was beyond redemption. But Tracy's voice, sharp and cynical, echoed in his ears, reminding him that compassion often came at too high a price. In the days that followed, the mansion buzzed with the ripple effects of Ronnie's exposure. Family members came and went, each one eager to weigh in on the drama. Ned offered sarcastic commentary about how Tracy should consider writing a book on spotting liars, while Brooklyn rolled her eyes and muttered about how typical it was for outsiders to latch onto their family name. Even Monica, with her usual calm demeanor, admitted she had sensed something off about Ronnie but hadn't wanted to stir up conflict. The Quartermaines, for all their dysfunction, shared one trait in common, a deep suspicion of outsiders who dared to infiltrate their world. Ronnie had confirmed their instincts, and in a strange way, her betrayal seemed to pull them closer together, if only temporarily. But Ronnie hadn't disappeared from Port Charles. Word of her expulsion from the mansion spread quietly through town, and whispers followed her wherever she went. To most, she was just another con artist who had aimed too high and fallen short. But to Ronnie, every sideways glance, every hushed conversation, only fueled her determination. She began to dig into the Quartermaines, learning their histories, their weaknesses, their old scandals that never truly stayed buried. If she couldn't be part of their family, she would make sure their perfect facade cracked, exposing the rot beneath. And she knew exactly where to start, by targeting Michael, the one who had once believed in her. Michael, unaware of the storm brewing outside, tried to refocus on his own life. He told himself that Ronnie's chapter was closed, that Tracy was right and the matter was settled. But late at night, when his guard was down, he couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of her. His instincts whispered warnings that his heart didn't want to hear. Ronnie's departure hadn't felt final. It had felt like the opening move in a much larger game. And if that was true, then he and Tracy might have just set in motion something far more dangerous than either of them realized.